Welcome to a new Alfresco video. We are talking today about secure communications with Alfresco 7.4. So we are going to explain how to create all that secure communications between all the different services that are part of the ACS stack of an Alfresco deployment. In this figure, you can see that the repository is talking to the database, to the transform service, to the search service, and also to the ActiveMQ. All these communications will be configured to be using the mTLS protocol. But for the Postgres database, that we are using only TLS, but we are going with the details later. So with mTLS, mutual TLS, the certificate from the client is used to authenticate the request in the different service. Also, from the UI part, from this Share application or the Alfresco content application or even the REST API of the repository, we are going to use TLS with Nginx in order to cover with this web proxy these communications. But let's move on to the details on how to do that. So the main thing we need is to create a certification authority. Remember to use 2048 bits for the asymmetric key, and also remember to use the standard P12 format for the key stores and trusters. So we are going to create this certification authority with a trustor, that is where all the live certificates live, and every service is going to use a key store or a private certificate in order to configure this secure protocol. Also with the Nginx, we are protecting all the access to the UI. We are moving into this topic because the Alfresco SSL generator got a new tool for this 7.4 release that is located on the run CA, run additional, and run encryption scripts. So we have 3 new scripts, and it was done to make more secure, to enable the mTLS communication with the transfer service. And with these new features, we are going to use them in order to apply that to all the other protocols that we have with the different services. I'm going to create that from scratch, but you have this Alfresco Secure Connection project that include the details of every step, and that also provides like the final results, so you can test this secure connection. So with that, we are going to start with the default community Docker Compose that is provided on the ACS deployment project, and we are going to modify incrementally all the different services with this configuration so we can test that everything is working as expected. So with that, let's move to the command line and let's start with it. Okay, so the first step is to create a Docker folder, and we are going to get the default Docker Compose just to have something base for our deployment. And once we have this Docker Compose deployment for community, we are going also to get the Alfresco SSL generator tool. So we can get this from the GitHub repository. And in my case, as I'm working from Mac, I can use the SSL tool folder. If you are using Windows, use the SSL tool win folder. So again, in my case, this folder, and the first step will be to create the CA. So this is the certification authority. This is the one that is issuing all the certificates we are going to use. So you can use some other tools or some other platform for that. If you have your own CA, then you just need to issue your certificates with your CA, but we are going to start from scratch, and we are going to create this this certification authority with the SSL generator tool. So for that, we are using the run CA script. Remember that the key size for RSA should be at least 2048 bits. We are protecting that with a password. We have a public name that in this case is Alfresco CA with the server name associated and with a validity duration of 2 years. So with that, we can create the CA certificate, public and private, and we can just copy the public certificate to our deployment, just to have this CA on our deployment. Let's create on this Docker folder, on the deployment folder. Remember that we have this Docker compose at this point. Okay, let me resize this. So we have this Docker folder. So we are going to create on this folder the key store, and we are going to copy the public certificate of the CA to this Docker store deployment. So we have the key store with the CA and with the certificate on it. So this will allow us to mount volumes with this certificate for the different services. Remember also when you are using certificates, just to apply the right permissions to it, so they can be used from the different services. So the second step would be to create. The first step after that, once we have the CA generated and we can start issuing different certificates, is that we are going to focus on the communication between the Alfresco repository and the database. So for that, we are using this run additional script to create the certificates for the Postgres, for the database. Depending on your database, you may have like different options or different configuration, but this is like a simple configuration to show how to create this TLS protocol between the Alfresco repository and the database. So we are using the run additional for the Postgres service. We have also protecting the password with this password, key says again, the recommended size, and all the key stores and trust stores we are going to use are P12. That is the standard for cryptographic stores. So we are using this standard type with also with a password. The trust store type is exactly the same with the same password, and we are going to generate the certificate for Postgres. Okay, so let's move on to this. So we have the certificate for Postgres already generated, and we are going also to copy this certificate to the Docker folder in order to get that available for the configuration. So in this case, you can see that in the certificates we have also we have the single certificate, but on the case stores folder we have also the case stores that include these certificates on it. Since the configuration for Postgres is using the certificates and not a trust store or a key store, we are going to copy the public certificate for Postgres, and we are going also to copy the private certificate for Postgres. Okay, we have both, and again, remember that when we are using certificates, we need to apply then the right permissions. Okay, so with that, we have all the certificates for Postgres available, and as we want to connect also with Alfresco, we need to create some key stores, trust stores, and certificates for Alfresco. So the same run additional script with the service name Alfresco, and with all the settings related to the key size, key stop type, and so on. This is more or less the same thing with the name Alfresco that is different in this case. Okay, with that, we have also the certificates for Alfresco. And again, we are going to create a folder inside the Docker folder to have these certificates available for the Docker configuration. So in this case, I'm also just copying the public Alfresco certificate instead of the trustor, because the configuration for JDBC is expecting a certificate and not a key store. We are copying also the private key of the certificate, and again we are generating the we are applying the right permissions for them. Also in this case, the JDBC connection, that is the protocol that it's used to connect from Alfresco to the database, is expecting the certificate in a specific format. So this is why we are converting the private certificate into a different format, that is P8 in this case. So we are converting this certificate into a different one, so we can use that from the JDBC connector. So with that, we need to type the password, because this is protected by a password. And we have the certificate just ready to be used from our Docker Compose configuration. Okay, so the next thing is just to configure, in this case, Postgres in order to allow only SSL or TLS connections from the outside, from other services. So for that, we are creating a configuration folder, and we are adding this configuration into this folder. So we are creating a configuration that allows connecting from local environment. Local environment in this case is inside the Docker container, and when you are connecting from outside the container, we are not accepting connections that are not SSL, that are not TLS. And for the TLS connections, we are verifying the CI, so the CI should be the same as we are using on Postgres, and we are also applying this protection to the password. So we are copying that to the config folder, so we can apply that configuration. If we move to the Docker Compose, we can change the configuration for Postgres. So yes, let's find the Postgres, and we need to add this configuration for the SSL. So yeah, let's create that. So we are adding the configuration for the external file with the configuration to accept only TLS permissions. We are enabling the SSL mode. We are also just including some this public certificate, private certificate, and the CA to the Postgres database engine. And for that, we need also to add from the outside all the different resources. So the configuration file, the public certificate, the private certificate, and also the CA. So with that, Postgres is starting with SSL mode, but we also need to modify the connection for the database. So this DB URL in this case should be different, as we are connecting using SSL. So we need that different URL connection that include the SSL true. We are verifying the CA. We have also this certificate, that is the public certificate, the Alfresco public key, and the Alfresco private key that is in this specific format. And obviously we need also to mount that as external volumes in the Alfresco Docker image. So for that, we can apply the volumes, and we are just applying, we are mounting all the different certificates that we need for this configuration. So once we have that, we can just start the composition just to check if everything works as expected. Okay, so once Alfresco is started, we can test that Alfresco is working as expected, and we can also check if the database is protected with SSL. So we are trying first a connection without SSL, just to see if we can connect. We are expecting this, so connections are not allowed with no encryption. But if we apply the properties for SSL with the different certificates, the password, and the SSL mode, if we do that, then the connection is successful. So we did it fine, and now we have Alfresco repository connecting to the database by using mTLS. So let's move on to the next service. In this case, we are going to connect the transform service with the Alfresco repository by using mTLS. So we need also a certificate for the transform core AIO service with the same password, key size, and types that we were using before, and with this specific CNAME. So with that, we have the key stores generated, and we are going again to copy these key stores, and in this case we are using the key stores to the Docker deployment folder. You can also create a specific configuration for every different transfer engine. Remember that we have LibreOffice, Tika, and different transfer engine, but in this case I'm applying this only to the AIO, to the all-in-one transform service. So we create the folder, and then we are copying the certificates, not the certificates, in this case the key stores, to the folder. And we need also to copy the key stores for Alfresco to the Docker deployment folder, because on the step we did before this one, we only were copying the certificates. So we have now the key stores into the Docker folder with this engine AIO and Alfresco. So we have now on the key store Alfresco, we have the keys, but we have also the key store and the trustor. And for the transform, what was the name? The engine. For the engine, we have also the key store and the trustor. So with that, we just need to add the configuration on the Docker compose to apply these new key stores. For the transfer service, let me find that. For the transfer service, as I was saying, we need to add some environment variables. So the configuration is done by using environment variable with the server SSL enable, with the password we were using for the key store, a reference to the key store and the password, and also the type of the key store. Client auth is required, so this is mTLS. The same thing for the trustor. And also when you are connecting to some other service, you have also the client properties for the same thing. And as we are using files inside this container, we need also to create the volumes. So these are the key store and the trustor, and we are mapping that inside the container. So this is the configuration we need to apply for the transfer service, and we need also to apply some configuration to Alfresco in order to use this key store and trustor. So for that, we are adding this key store type and key store location, password type and password location with the passwords we are using for that. And we are creating also the configuration for the connection string of the transfer service. So this was the transfer service that we have before using HTTP, and we are going to change that to use HTTPS and to apply the mTLS protocol. So now we are going to use HTTPS with mTLS enabled and with the hostname verification disabled. Hostname verification disabled in this case means that we are not using like trusted certificates, so we are using a self-signed CA. But in the case you are you have set up your proper CA, then this should be enabled, so you can increase the confidence in your connection. So we have the certificates mounted, but now we need also to mount the key store and the trustor. So with that, with the Alfresco configuration that is using HTTPS, and with the transfer configuration that is also using the certificates, let's verify that now this communication is happening by using mTLS. Let's wait a bit till Alfresco starts again. Now that the repository is started, we can verify if the transform service URL is available. So we have that in the 1890 port. So if we try that, this combination of host and port requires TLS. So let's change to TLS, and it's again failing because we need to use a certificate. So if we use the certificates we were generating for that, if we try to simulate that we are connecting from Alfresco by using the public key, then in this case we have the expected value. So we have checked that this configuration is being applied properly. And let's move to the next one. On this step, we are going to create the mTLS configuration between Alfresco and search services. So for that, again, we can create the key store and the password for the Solar6 for the search services with exactly the same patterns. So with the key size, key store type, and so on. And in this case, using as common name these search services. So with that, we have both key stores created, and as before, we are copying all this material to the Docker folder deployment. So we have that available on the key store folder, in this case Solar6 can be. Search. Okay, so we have on the search folder the Solar6 Kickstore and the Trustor. Once we have that, and in this case, what we need also to do is to extend the default Alfresco Docker image, because we need to set some properties inside the Solar cores. So for that, we are going to create a folder again inside of the Docker deployment, and we are going to create a Docker file so we can extend default Alfresco Docker image. So just let me bring the content. So we are extending default Alfresco search service Docker image, and we have as parameters, as environment variables, the trustor type and the key store type, and also the location. So we are just setting these properties on the Solar cores so they can apply the mTLS configuration. So once we have that, we can move to the Docker Compose in order to apply the configuration for Solar6. So yes, let's find the Solar6 that was using secret by default. We are going to change that to a Docker image extension with the right properties for the mTLS. Okay, so let me also bring this configuration for Solar6. Okay, at this point, okay, that's perfect. Let's check that the index Actian is fine. Yeah, everything is fine. So we have this configuration for Solar 6. We are extending the Docker image, so this is why we have this context search. We are just passing the right values to the extension. We are creating the configuration with secure comms HTTPS, and also just applying the configuration for Yeti to be used. And we are also mounting the key store and the trust store that we were generating before to Solar. And also for Alfresco, we need to change something. So we need to enable the SSL connector in Tomcat. So for that, we need also to extend the Alfresco Docker image. So for that, we are creating again this Docker file for the extension of the Alfresco repository. And inside this Docker file, we are going to apply, or we are going to enable the SSL port in Tomcat. So with that, we are extending from the default Alfresco content repository community Docker image. We have some parameters like the trustor type and the password, and we are adding this configuration to Tomcat. So from this point, Tomcat of the Alfresco repository will be using port 8080 for plain connections, and it is going to use this H443 port for SSL connections. SSL enable with the scheme, with the clean authentication, with the right protocol. Remember to use always TLS version 1.2 or upper TLS version 1.3. Also with the keystore file and with the keystore parse. So we are adding this configuration to Alfresco, and we need also to apply that to the Docker Compose. So let's get back to the Docker Compose and let's find the Alfresco. In this case, we are not using default image anymore. So we need to remove this one and to add, and we need to add the configuration for extending the Docker image and to apply this version and the type, password, and the location of the different services. We also need this configuration to use the certificates. And finally, we need to modify the properties to connect to Solar, because we are changing from secret mode to this mTLS. So we remove all the Solar settings, and we can apply the new values. So these new values includes HTTPS connection and the SSL port, and the other thing is more or less the same. Remember that we are also mounting these certificates so they can be used from Tomcat and also from Java. So with that, we have the right setting in order to test that Alfresco and Solar are using also mTLS to communicate. Again, we just need to wait a bit and we can check that everything is working as expected. Once Alfresco is up and ready, we can go and check if Solar is working with mTLS. Just check the HTTP port to be sure that this is not accepting communications anymore. Okay, not allowed. If we try the HTTPS protocol, let's see what happens. We are expecting this not to be working. Also, let me check localhost. Okay, but certificate, and if we use the Alfresco certificate with the private key and the public key to connect to Solar, then we are expecting the right response to our request. So again, we have Alfresco and Share Services Solar communicating using mTLS. Let's move to the next one. Okay, so in this case, we are going to secure the ActiveMQ and repository communication. We are not going to use mTLS, but we are going to use TLS with a user password. So we create again all the certificates for the ActiveMQ service, same parameters as before. And once we have, then again, we are going to create the folder on the Docker deployment. We are going to copy all the key stores, and you can read that in this case we are using we are not using P12 format, P12 type. We are using the JKS type, and this is because ActiveMQ is not accepting this P12. So yes, an exception for this step, but as general recommendation, use P12 always that you want to create a trust store and a key store for to be used with your services. So since default ActiveMQ Docker image is not configured to support mTLS, we are going also to extend the default Docker image. So we create a Docker file for that, and inside this Docker image, inside this extension, we are creating the configuration to enable the SSL connection. Instead of the TCP, we are using the SSL connection, and we are also using the key store type and the key store pass with the key store itself, right? The key store and the trust store. So we have this extension for the ActiveMQ, and then we need to move to the Docker Compose to apply this configuration. So again, let's find the ActiveMQ service. I'm able to find it. It should be there. Okay. Okay, here it is. Okay, so now we need to we don't need to extend. We need to extend the Docker image, so we need to change this line. We are not using default Docker image anymore, but we are extending this one, right? This is going to use the Docker file we already used. And also we need to mount all the trust store and key store we just generated. So with these volumes, we are providing to the container the key store and the trust store for ActiveMQ. And on the Alfresco part, we also need to change the configuration for the broker URL. So let's find that. So this is the messaging broker URL. We are not going to use HTTP, plain HTTP anymore. So let's add the expected properties. So we are going to use SSL, and we are going also to use the key store and the trust store of Alfresco with the right TLS protocol. And again, these key store and trust store are mounted as volumes at this point. So yes, let's save the modifications, and let's check that everything is working fine again. So once the repository is up and ready, we can check by using the ActiveMQ web console that everything is working as expected. So we can manage the active broker, and we can see that this is listening to localhost, and that the topics are populated, so it's working as expected. And if we can see the connection, we can see that we are using the right protocol for it. Okay, that is working, and let's move to the next one. As final step, we are going to configure the web proxy in order to use TLS for the connection. So just move from HTTP to HTTPS. We are creating again the key store and the trust store for localhost using the same key size and the same things, but the command name should be web proxy in this case. So once the certificate is generated, again, we need to copy these certificates to the Docker Compose deployment folder. So we create this folder, and in this case, we are not using the key store trust store, but the certificate itself. So we copy the public certificate, we copy also the private certificate, and then we need to apply the configuration to engines. You know that we are using by default engines for the configuration. So we are going to create a custom configuration for engines in order to support this TLS protocol. So we create the configuration file, and inside this configuration file, we are going to add the expected configuration. So yes, let me find my way. So okay, so this is regular. We are going to listen on port default SSL port. We are going to use the certificate, the public and the private certificate. We are going to accept the secure protocols, and all the other stuff is just the web proxy configuration for Alfresco, for the Alfresco content application, and so on. So once we have this, we need to change our proxy in the Docker Compose in order to use this new configuration. So if we move to the Docker Compose again, we can find the proxy, and we are not going to use out-of-the-box Alfresco proxy because we need to apply some specific configuration. So we are going to use default engines Docker image. So yes, let's do that. I think that I need to move that. It's fine. So we are going to use default engines Docker image, and we are going to apply the configuration, and also we are going to provide the certificate to the container by mounting these volumes. So once we have that, we need also to modify the Alfresco service in the Docker Compose. So we need to use the HTTPS protocol instead of the HTTP. So let's find the all these properties. So this is not going to be HTTP anymore, but we are going to use HTTPS. So let's paste the properties. So in this case, we are using the secure port with HTTPS protocol. And in the case of Share, we need to extend also default Docker image. So again, we are going to create the extension for Share. Let me find also the content. So this configuration is required for Tomcat in order to return a secure connection when you are using a proxy. So we are using the proxy port, and we are also declaring that this connection, even by using port 8080, will be considered as HTTPS and secure. So the next step is to apply this configuration to Solar. So let's find, to Share application. So let's find the Share application, and again, we are not using default Docker image, so we need to remove this line, and we need to apply the extension. So we are using this Docker file we already defined, and also we need to change all the information related to the to the HTTPS ports. So in this case, we just need to remove this one that was duplicated. So we just need to declare that the context and the protocol for Alfresco. So once this is ready, we have everything configured. We have the engines, the web proxy with the certificates. We have also Alfresco with the HTTPS protocol, and we have also Solar with the right configuration. Once Alfresco has started properly, we can check that everything is working as expected. So let's check HTTPS for localhost to test the content application. This is not a secure certificate, so we need to use this check in order to accept that the certificate is not safe, but the ACA application is fine, so we are using HTTPS, and the same thing for this Share application. So let's try with Share, and it should be the same thing. So we are using Share by using this secure connection. Okay, so both are behind this HTTPS, and also finally the Alfresco web application should be behind this proxy. Okay, that's fine. We we get it. We have all the different services connected with TLS. Just remember that we were using TLS for the key store and for the ActiveMQ connection, using also additionally credentials. And we have mTLS between the repository and search, between the repository and the transfer core. And also we are covering everything with a web proxy that is using TLS. So it's everything for today. I hope it is useful for you, and see you next time.